and he and I have always wanted to make a love letter to the town we grew up in, which is St. John's, Newfoundland. And 7 years ago, we knocked around this idea, 7, 8 years ago, and we just kept working on this character, and we started shooting these character tests, and that's how those scenes came to be.
In the heart of a struggling Newfoundland neighbourhood known as the Courts, unfolds an unlikely friendship between Billy, a tough guy, and Mohammed, a recently immigrated Syrian refugee. Haunted by a criminal past, Billy finds himself a fish out of water in a neighbourhood vastly different from the one he left behind. The movie is written and directed by Sexton, who joined us to talk about the project. Nick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So your movie has been 7 years in the making, and your world premiere is at the AIFF Film Festival in September. How does that feel? I almost was unsure when they gave me the note to say you were working on it for 7 years. It must feel really incredible to be sharing it with the world.
Yeah, it's. I think I've heard someone say it's like opening and closing a business. It's one of those feelings. So
Yeah.
I haven't sent it off to see yet, but it feels like it's the end of something. And it's been periodically 7 years. It wasn't like 7 years straight. It was like we'd go into it, we'd write it, we'd come back. We started shooting it 7 years ago, and yeah, but it has been a long 7 years. Talking about this project.
And one of the actors, also ages 7 years during the process. Is that right? Is I was told this information. When I was watching the film, which I really enjoyed, I was trying to work out which actor was it. Was it his son? Was it Billy's son that was the character that it grew up?
Well, yeah, it was much more noticeable in his son, Jackson Petton, who plays Brandon. Yeah, he ages 7 years, and it's quite noticeable because he's an 8-year-old boy when we filmed the opening scene with him, and then when we find him in the story, he's 15. So there's a dramatic difference.
Yeah.
And it's also in the lead, Billy. Like all those little vignette flashbacks we have, he's probably 40 pounds lighter. He's much more chiseled, and
Yeah.
and that was somewhat by design as well. So yeah, so the two of those characters were a 7-year difference in filming for sure.
No, it was amazing because I instantly recognized when I saw him as a 15-year-old. I was like, "Wow, that's the kid you see right at the start."
Well, I'm glad
So
you picked up on that. I was worried because I started. We sort of joked, going, "Oh no, our like boyhood moment is now could be deceived or perceived as AI." you know.
yeah, exactly. Just de-aging, just like Marvel do. You just did the Marvel thing of making him look younger.
Yeah, but it's actually it's legit, and I think that makes us comfortable knowing that we did it that way. So it's good.
So this movie is brilliantly gritty. You've got it all shot in black and white, which really adds to that kind of the tone of it. Where did the idea come from in terms of the vision and the story and how you package it together?
Well, the lead actor is Sean Dalton, who plays Billy Skinner. He's a really good friend of mine, and he and I have always wanted to make a love letter to the town we grew up in, which is St. John's, Newfoundland. And 7 years ago, we knocked around this idea, 7, 8 years ago, and we just kept working on this character, and we started shooting these character tests, and that's how those scenes came to be. And when we were filming them, we were testing black and white, we were testing color, we were doing a lot of testing, and we just found that the black and white just told the story. Like it just sucked you in. And St. John's is sort of predominantly known for these jelly bean houses and this color. If you watch the tourism ads, and we wanted it to be far removed from that. We wanted it to be its own thing and its own vibe. And I think we talked long and hard about those decisions. Like I wish I could give you some sort of Hitchcock inspired answer, but the truth is we just tested it. We just kept talking about the tone and the character and the grittiness, as you say, and that's sort of how it came to be. And it's a real different thing because you can't go back. I mean, once when you shoot black and white, you're lighting for black and white. Shadows are your friends. So it's not like you can just flip the switch. It doesn't look the same in color. You're locked in, yeah. But no, it's been it was a lot of conversations around the tone and the design of the film.
So you said it's like a love letter to your hometown. How much of you or like the environment you grew up in did you put into this? How much did you observe and then kind of, put in the film, I guess?
Yeah, it's the film is a love letter to St. John's. Sean and I both grew up in downtown St. John's. We're what we'd call townies. So a lot of these characters, get the title Skeet. Hard, tough guy. I guess they call them pikeys in the UK or in Ireland. So a Skeet is a really tough guy, and we we wanted to, at first, to make this really gritty film about this sort of tough guy Billy Skinner, and that's what we shot in those character tests. And as the film evolved, or the writing rather evolved in the process, we were going to these low income neighborhoods that we grew up around, and we noticed they were not populated with pasty white Irish looking people like us. They were populated by Syrian immigrants, Middle Eastern immigrants, people from Sudan, and it became clear to us that this was the new Newfoundland. And we thought, wow, how cool would it be if this was a redemption story of this guy getting out of jail, and he comes back to his own neighborhood and he's a fish out of water in his own home. And to us, that became a better story to grab onto.
And that's one of the things you do. You have this kind of you draw parallels between the refugee experience and the ex-con experience. He's in a community he doesn't recognize anymore. The landscape has changed. He's not almost doesn't get the same level of respect from everyone on that level. But then has this through an act of kindness from his Syrian refugee neighbor who's a taxi driver, that kind of friendship blossoms. So those parallels and those touch points between those two experiences, how did you kind of come up with those to kind of spin those characters in that dual narrative, I guess?
It's a great question because as soon as we decided we were going to take this route with the Syrian narrative, I contacted a friend who worked for Association for New Canadians, and he put me in touch with his name is Ken Walsh, and then he put me in touch with a Syrian Newfoundlander named Iyad Sakar. He had a documentary, female filmmaker named Mira Hamor, and then I just consulted with these two Syrian Canadian friends who became really close friends. And we just went to these neighborhoods and we met a lot of people like Mo, and found these real life stories that were happening in these low income neighborhoods. Like the when you watch those scenes, like the Syrian birthday party, a lot of those people in those scenes really lived there. Like we didn't just put Middle Eastern people in low income Newfoundland neighborhoods. Like they are there, and those friendship stories are real. So I think when you make anything, you got to believe it, and I had to know that it was real in order to believe it. So yeah, so a lot of it was just going to this one or two neighborhoods in St. John's over and over again, and just hearing these real life stories from people, and getting inspired and getting excited by this new Newfoundland that we wanted to show off. Yeah.
One of the scenes that off the back of that, where Billy and his son get invited to Mo's home to his family, and they're trying Syrian food for the first time. Is there a really funny line where he's like, "Is that like Korean food?" But
Oh,
it's a very fun, positive scene where they're kind of like
oh,
trying all this new cuisine and kind of loving it.
that's 100% Iad, the script consultant on the film. When he and I were going through the script, it was curry because when he first moved to Newfoundland, he said, Nick, there's one thing when I first moved here. Every time I would try to prepare some Middle Eastern food, Newfoundlanders would always go, "What's that, like curry or something?" And I thought, and I laughed so hard, I was like, "Oh my god, that is going in like so." And then it gets probably one of the bigger laughs of the film. And but yeah, I think that's because it's real. And then we
Yeah,
double up on it, of course, as you know, in the later scene where, and it's true because you stop any Newfoundlander and ask them what's Syrian food, and they might think it's curry. But just to go back to that, I mean, the boy who plays the son of Mo, Hamza, he's really a refugee from Syria, and I met his family, and I sat on those cushions in the room, and his mother owns a Syrian restaurant at the St. John's Farmers Market. So all that food in that scene was prepared by her, and we had sat in those living rooms and talked to these people before months before we shot the film. So I felt like we did every bit of prep we possibly could, and we made sure that we were like accurate within that because there's Arabic speaking scenes in this film, and that's where
yeah.
and I don't speak Arabic, and so we had to make sure that we had Mira, that documentary filmmaker, Mira Hamor. She came on for those scenes and made sure that that the dialogue was right and we got everything right, and there was a real great communication between everybody making those scenes and writing that dialogue.
So Mo, the father figure from the Syrian refugee family, played by Jay. His his character is almost like he's like a rock. I feel to so many people within the story. Tell us a little bit about how much Jay brought to the role from his own personal experience.
When we were trying to cast Mo, I was talking to Iyad Sakar and the consultant, and I was like, Iyad, you could play Mo, and he's like, I'm not an actor, and I said, no, you could play it, and he said, I talked to my father, and we know who should play Mo, and they suggested one name, and it was Jay Abdo, and I watched this video of him was on CBC, and it was this you know story of this big actor in the Middle East from Syria who's been in a ton of films and TV shows, and was kind of exiled from his homeland, and spoke out against his government, and was forced to be a refugee and had to flee for his life in Los Angeles. And in this interview, the CBC interview, he's walking down the Hollywood Walk of Fame, like looking at stars, and people are stopping him, going, "Oh my God, it's Jihad Abdo," because his real name is Jihad, and he had to, change his name. He had to learn how to, get better at English, and he was, his real story was so much like Mo's, because here Mo is a guy that came to, Newfoundland from Syria, is forced to drive taxi, really wants to own a barber shop because that's his real trade, but is forced to live, live this life. So we saw those similarities in the two, and we sent off, and Jay, of course, built himself back up. He all of a sudden is working with Tom Hanks, Nicole Kidman, Werner Herzog. So we thought there's not a chance he's going to do this film. This is way above our lead, our level. And we sent the script to his agent, and he read it, and he called me. He talked about it. He was incredible. I mean, he came to Newfoundland, and it was like he got out of the car, and it was like Brad Pitt was showed up and kissed a baby. It was everyone came, and people were getting selfies in the middle of takes. They'd walk on set and just like take a selfie with them in the middle of the take. He was, and his wife Fadia played his real wife in the film as well. I remember we were prepping, and I was, in the heat of it, trying to get locations, trying to get actors. This person can't do it. This thing that. And I remember he came and he called me, and before I even met him, he had gone over to the boys' house that we casted as his son. He was a first-time actor. His real name is Mahmoud Tome, and who plays Hamza. And he went over to Mahmoud's house and he practiced. He rehearsed with Mahmoud. Like he just and that was invaluable.
Mm,
Who does that? You know what I mean? Like
that's amazing.
yeah. So he was just a gift and just a really genuinely good human being.
Now, one of the things that really stood out to me as well was Mo's experience of racism as a taxi driver. You kind of did a really good way of framing and depicting the racism, where the racism is kind of subtle and kind of almost background noise to his life, but you know that he's aware of it and he's dealing with it. So, how important was it to you to kind of portray that?
Well, yeah, we didn't want to, we didn't want to make the racism, an after school special scene. We didn't want to make it tacky or in your face, because racism isn't often in your face. It usually is those whispers that people hear in the BG. And so it was really important to not draw too much attention to it, but just to feel Mo struggle through it. And I that's what we tried to do with Mo and for the son at the school. And it's tough when you make a film about that has multiple themes like this film does, and you're trying to draw on racism, because a lot of people's reaction is to look away, uh, you know, because of that after school special that they might have seen, or whatever the case may be. But it was really important to be very sensitive about, like, not just to Syrian families or Middle Eastern, but also to to Newfoundland families, because we didn't want to make it up or make it too in your face. So that was really important to us. But I mean, it does exist. We have to talk about it. We can't act like it's not there. It's really really important. Yeah, big part of it. And there's a lot of revolving themes. So
Yeah.
you know, like, we didn't harp on it. I guess you would say we didn't like beat it to death. I hope.
No, no, it was incredibly subtle, but made it much more realistic. I felt because you're right, it wasn't on the nose or one of those a patronizing life lesson. You were depicting it in a way that I imagine it's experienced in that sense, where it's very low key. But I mean, there are so many. You talk about there are multiple themes in this movie, like. One of the other themes to add to the mix, and they're seamlessly interwoven. Everything kind of is nicely kind of packaged together in a sense with the narrative. But one other big theme that I kind of got was about addiction
Yeah.
and the role of drugs in the community, but also most noticeably how much effort you put into humanizing the drug users or the people recovering from a background with drug use. Was that a personal thing, or is that something that came from community observations?
Yeah, I mean, Sean could speak a bit more to the personal thing if he wanted to. I would say I'd worked on a documentary with CBC and Vice called Good People, and we had done an episode on the opioid crisis and predominantly in BC and Prince George. And I remember we went to Prince George and we got in the van and we went downtown, and it felt Mad Max like. We were afraid to almost get out of the vehicle. And I remember by day 3 we were walking around with these people, talking with them, not no fear at all, because they're just people, and just people that were addicts, and there was no violence towards us. There was, they weren't there to hurt us. And yeah, I really did want to humanize addicts in this film, and I wanted to hear their stories. I feel like St. John's is and all of Atlantic Canada is ever changing, and I as I said, Newfoundland. These are things we have to talk about in whether it's in cinema, whether it's in TV. And when I having done that documentary, I was really inspired by that, and I think I wrote the last pass of this script just after I had made that documentary in Prince George, and I really wanted to hit those hot buttons that are really happening. I mean, we were filming on a location on this one street that was a fine street when I grew up as a kid, and there was a trap house, drug house that was selling drugs in and out of it all day, right? And we had to be weary of that. Um, yeah, it's ever changing. So I think we definitely, and there's some real people in this film. There's some first time actors in this film. I'm sure you noticed that I would say the group counseling, and yeah. So I'd spoken. I knew one of those people growing up, and he had told this story to the news, and I said, he was an extra that day, and I said, would you? Or he asked me if I'd be comfortable with him talking. I said yes. We put a lavalier mic on him, and he had the entire crew in tears within minutes, because you can't write that stuff. You can't, like,
No.
you can't. It's too real to write.
I love that now I'm knowing this information, having watched the film and not known like the level of authenticity and reality that was kind of blended in. Yeah, it kind of it adds an extra layer of gravity to it.
Well, yeah, I love a film when there's unknown faces and you question, was that person real? Was that person an actor? That thin line to me is great. Is great filmmaking. Yeah, I'm. Some people have watched them going, where did you find that actor? He did the thing with the teeth. And you go, no, no, he's a real person.
My next question was about the depiction of drug use. There's people using drugs, but there's like obviously the long term effects of drugs, but then the even longer effects of drugs. And the scene with Leah visiting her child who's in protective care or foster system, being and visiting under observation and being given very strict rules to see him, having not seen him for a long time, was genuinely heartbreaking. So, where did you get the idea for that scene? Is that a story that kind of came through from talking to people with addictions, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd worked on that documentary, Good People, and I'd heard these stories firsthand, all over the country about mothers that weren't only able to see their children with supervised visitation, and that was heartbreaking. And I remember when we wrote the film and I talked to Kate about it and how we were going to shoot that scene and how we wanted it to feel very, again, very real and very documentary like, it was very, very careful. I mean, even with the child, it was the casting of the child, it was tricky, because working with a child like the that young, to it could make or break the scene. So yeah, I had heard a lot of these stories, and they're going on. And they're I also worked on a thing about with a social worker once, and this woman told me some harrowing stories of having to take children from houses, about what she saw in those places. But yeah, no, it's one of my favorite scenes in the film, and it feels very grounded and real. And Kate just gave an incredible performance in that scene. So I'm glad it affected you the way it affected me, because I remember I talked with the editor. There's two editors in this film. I remember talking to Kirk, and we didn't really have the scene where we wanted it. And I remember we were like, "How's the scene looking?" And he goes, "It's bonkers sad." And I said, "Yeah." And I watched it, and it's really hard to, because it feels incredibly real.
Yeah. No, it does, and especially just the room, the setting, you kind of framed it so kind of well. I feel like there's, yeah, is what it, and it is the long term effects of drug use and addiction that you don't always get kind of portrayed in movies. So, yeah, it was refreshing to see, definitely.
You get these, you watch some films, and it's no one's fault. It's not like, it's just, you write in the thing, you write down, lead, uses drugs, and then it gets carried away. And if you don't talk about it in prep, constantly, then it might get overlooked. And then
Yeah.
you might have something that doesn't feel authentic or real. But I think we had so much time in prep that I think we were able to go to these locations that felt extra. I mean, everything in that room was already there when we got there. A lot of
Mm.
posters on the wall, and it was great. I mean, we had a great production design team as well that added to it. Don't get me wrong, but yeah, it just felt like a real room where this visitation would happen. I mean, just that alone. I mean, that set alone could make or break the scene.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
so yeah, and then the toy the kids playing with could make or break that kind of scene to make it feel authentic. So yeah, I think we didn't want it to be like the racism. We just didn't want it to be too big and in your face, because, like I said, there's revolving themes and there's more than just one in this film.
Yeah. No, exactly. One when you're talking about performances as well, Billy's character has this like storm brewing under the surface.
Yeah,
There's the depiction of a lot of violence in the movie, but you can tell that this ex-con has come back. He says in his own words that he wants to move on and make a better life now, but and there's so much trauma, I guess, or past baggage, or the flashbacks you use give a sense of like almost like a PTSD relationship with violence at times that trigger him. He's a very complex character, like the idea of a Skeet being this kind of tough guy, but you added a lot of depth to him, with also with your lead actor as well. So tell me a bit about kind of shaping and portraying that.
yeah, that was something we talked about at length. You know, we've all seen films open with guy gets out of prison. We've seen it done countless times. How do you nuance that? How do you approach that story? Or how do you approach a redemption story with a different approach? And we always, the original concept of the film was Billy being the muscle for this local outfit in St. John's, and then having that as his background. And I've seen this story so many times. I've seen guys go to jail, that grew up like Billy Skinner. They come out, they do well for 6 months, and then it's just slowly back, and then that's recidivism, and it's just a vicious cycle, and it happens over and over again. And we wanted to talk about him having this violence under him and trying so hard to be a good person, and trying to make amends with his son, and forge this new relationship with Mo. But of course, when you have that much woven into your DNA of violence and trauma, like, it is hard to fight back. And will he or won't he is always in question, no matter what. So I think we talked about that endlessly, and I think Sean really delivered on that. I mean, Sean's done Sean's just great, and he's done a lot of. He's been around a lot of Billy Skinner, so I think he too knows what that. I think he had a hit on what that guy would feel like and look like. He he's been around the country multiple times, around the world, in fact, with a band, and I think he'd met a few Billy Skinners in his day, so he was really in tune to like what that guy would be emoting in those those quiet times in his room.
Mm. I really felt like the fatherhood theme with his son was really brought out that kind of took him on that path of redemption.
Yeah.
And that one line that really stood out to me was how you're supposed to know what love is if you've never felt it. And you could kind of see his character wrestling with that, trying to be a good dad, but not necessarily having his own framework of what that looks like.
Yeah, I guess I'm really fascinated by like can people that grow up around poverty and lack of love, can they love, and that's it's a tough question. I mean, I grew up around a lot of Billy Skinners that had good moms, and but might have been addicts, and they wouldn't hurt anybody, but they were just in it. They've always been a thief. They've always been an addict. But they have these big hurts, and so you find yourself rooting for them all the time. Like this neighbor I grew up with, I rooted for him every time he would come out of jail. I would be like, this is it. He's gonna be better this time. And it was just so hard, to watch him go back and forth. And then once you're in that system, it's really hard to get out. So yeah, so catharsis moment, or his beach confessional, I guess it was. Sean drew a lot. I mean, there was some improv in this film for sure. And Sean, we'd take the sides and we'd walk and we'd talk and we'd break down what he would say here, and then we try the dialogue that was on the page, and if we had to go off, then we would. And I remember Sean wrestling with that on that beach, and yeah, that was, and some of those words were his, and so maybe some of those emotions were his too.
And we've already kind of alluded to the fact that this movie has lots of layers, lots of themes, but you have everything kind of come into a big crescendo with the kind of final standoff scene. I imagine you must have felt a lot of pressure shooting that, knowing that everything kind of comes to a head with a lot of the storylines and the characters in that one moment. So, what was it like shooting and also planning for
Yeah.
that scene? Because it's everything hinged on that moment to wrap up, I guess.
Yeah, the film is very doc-like at times, and as you point out, and very real. And we had a little bit of plot moving. We didn't want the whole film to be very plotty and very like obvious. And oh, I know where this goes. We tried to
Yeah.
misdirect you off, and like maybe it's about this, and so that was really important. And that final scene, definitely has a lot more plot going on than it does doc realness happening. And it was definitely tricky. I remember we had one night to film that scene, and we were moving, like we were like, okay, we're there, and it was definitely challenging. I mean, I on these low budget Canadian films, you literally, I talked to some people working on big American stuff. They go, yeah, we had the entire day to do that scene. I'm like, yeah, we shot 5 scenes that day, so there was no time for coverage
Yeah, yeah,
on the standoff scene, or the
yeah, yeah.
the Foster scene, which is a beautiful scene. That was one of 3 scenes that day. So sometimes you just have to roll with what you're given in those moments. And yeah, I was endings are tricky. Endings are tricky for anyone. I talked to a lot of fellow filmmakers, and and endings are subjective too. I mean, you talk to some people that don't work in cinema. Like there's one person that lived in the area, and she came back from a movie while we were filming that night at the local cinema, some big Hollywood film, and it was like a horror film. And I remember she came back, and I said, "How was the movie?" She goes, "The ending sucked." I was like, I thought, wow, yeah. It's like some people, like, it's a make or break for some. The ending,
Yeah.
it really can.
Well, and I was on a knife edge because there was the possibility of some of the characters you really kind of get emotionally attached to and you're rooting for, having a tragic ending. There's a lot of, I don't want to give too much away
Yeah,
for
yeah,
people who are listening to this, but there's, you go in like, who will we lose someone that we care about? Will we lose one of the good characters, I guess, or one of the characters who were on that path or supporting the others? So there was a lot of tension there, and I won't reveal how it played out.
yeah.
People have to watch your film to find that out. So,
I'm glad you felt that way, because that's what I wanted you to feel like.
good, good job.
I wanted you to doubt what would, yeah. So I'm glad you felt that way, and there's some surprises there. There's as we keep going, and
Yeah.
I've only made one other feature film and it's a comedy, and it's coming up on a 10-year anniversary, and they played it recently at some screening, and it's a completely different film. Like it's tonally, it's a screwball comedy about a gibberish mini dirt bike rapper from New. But they're both. But then there's these similarities. There's these like I watched it, I was like, oh my god, yeah, it's a love letter to St. John's as well. And it's got what could be considered as multiple endings, so you see a little bit of yourself in these films and these projects. So I definitely am. I definitely lean to never wanting the party to end.
Yeah, exactly. I wanted to come back to your point as well about the fact that you didn't want it to feel too scripted. You wanted it to feel a documentary, and I know you've said it kind of, you can kind of see how that end scene, up until that point, you very kind of skillfully made it seem like some of the scenes are quite incidental, almost cinema verite, like we're observing without you kind of necessarily taking things in a particular direction. You did a great way, made it feel very natural. But yeah, subtly then you creep up on us with this narrative and this kind of great ending. So it was I only just realized that now you told me. You did such a good job of it. So
Thank you. The funny thing is, you obviously make these films and you share them with my stepdad Nigel was a big part of it. He's the DP, and he's one of the story consultants as well. Like he was a big part of the film. My mother Mary's a producer. So and then there's Sean, and there's you share the rough cuts with people as you go, and everybody has their own opinion about how the film should end. And ultimately, but they always say, you can do that. He goes, but it's up to you, and it's your movie, right? Yeah, it's your movie, right? So you're like left with these like, oh, I know what this person would do. I know this person likes tragedy. This person likes hope. This person likes so and so. But yeah, the film could have ended on the beach easily. Maybe the film does end on the beach, but ultimately, yeah, there's so many ways to go, and we were sort of tasked with this film of having what some might consider as too much footage because of all that footage from 7 years ago. When you're writing these scripts, you go flashback, right? And then you try a flashback scene, you go, oh, that doesn't work. That's not working. And then you have to rethink of how those flashbacks come in. He goes, oh, maybe they're just flashes, these visceral kind of like, vignettes like we talked about. So I feel like the ending could have went so many ways in this film. And one of the most important thing was I didn't realize how much of an ensemble cast this was. And then so you really do want to see where they all end up, I feel.
yeah.
And I think I owed it to the characters that we created to find that out.
Oh, well, I already enjoyed it, and I imagine you must be very excited to come to Halifax for the festival and screen it and get a sense of audience reaction as well.
I think so. I wanted to make an important film about my hometown of St. John's, and I wanted to make a film that's going to live much longer past my time. So I can't wait to hear what people think about it. It's you got to prepare yourself for these conversations, right? And I'm excited to send this business we're opening and closing, and at the Atlantic Film Festival is great. I've been there a few times and I love it. So I'm excited to bring it there.
Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us and giving us so much insight on behind the scenes of your film. I really enjoyed it. It's fantastic.
Did I ruin it? Did I ruin the film? I mean, did I give it all away? No, I'm joking.
No, we're good. It reminded me so much of my childhood in Wales. Everything looks the same. The characters dress the same. So it's a very, very, very weird. I found it very familiar, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but I thoroughly enjoyed it and could definitely recognize so many of those characters.
Oh yeah,
too.
I bet you do. Yeah, I know. It's very important that we say, because I've listened to some podcasts, and it's very, very important to say if someone's Welsh or if they're from the UK. It's a big difference. You don't want to,
It's like calling a Canadian an American. So
or a Nova Scotian and Newfoundlander, or
exactly.
Yeah,
you can't mix these things up. You got to do your research. So
it's cod haddock. You got to figure it out, right? Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me.
We'll see you at the festival.
See you there. Can't wait. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the 2024 Atlantic International Film Festival podcast. You can find out more about the events and book tickets by visiting atlanticfilmfestival.ca. I've been Rhys Waters. Now go watch a movie.